Okay, so we've seen a question like this sort of on a previous paper. So one of the strategies, again, here is to think about grouping things to make it easier so that you don't actually have to do all the math. So what we're going to see here is we have 47 groups of 12 and 53 groups of 12. Well, that really just means that we have that many groups of 12. Well, 47 plus 53, that's 100. So we really have 100 groups of 12. And then here we have 53 groups of 8, and we have 47 groups of 8. So again, that's really like saying we have 100 groups of 8. So 100 groups of 12 is 1,200, and 100 groups of 8 is 800. So together, that equals 2,000. So hopefully by now, at least after doing so many of these, you realize that the strategy is not just figuring each piece out and adding them together, but there's got to be a faster and easier way to do the mental math. And grouping can be a very, very useful strategy. All right, so let's look at this one here. So first of all, a couple of things with language. 2 digits means, right, prime number. So we have to make sure it's a prime number. The numbers are different, so that's important. And then their number has to be, the sum of their numbers have digits that total 9. So I think one of the easiest ways to do this is just to start with 2-digit numbers that's digits equal 9. Forget about the prime number thing. Let's just think about numbers that add up to 9. So for example, 1 and 7, 2 and 6, 3, sorry, I think I said 9, I meant 8, 3 and 5, 4 and 4. Notice the pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 3, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 6 and 2, 7 and 1, and then the last one would be 8 and 0. So there is a pattern with these. Now, once we have these numbers, let's look for the prime numbers. So there's a prime number, there is a prime number, and there is a prime number. So there's our numbers. And then it says that Dawn's number is the least, so this is Dawn, and Ron's number is the greatest. So what's John's number? There it is right there. Okay, so again, if you think through this problem, it's not a challenging problem once you think through a strategy of how to approach it. And that's really the whole point of you being involved with doing this work, is learning strategies to become a better problem solver. It's not that you're getting the answers all right now, it's that you're listening to this and you're figuring out how to become a better problem solver. All right, let's look at the next one here. So Sally leaves her house and jogs along a straight road after 1 hour. So let's say here's Sally's house. It's not working now. My pen has stopped working, so I'm going to have to use my finger, so it might be a little bit messy. So here is Sally's house. So she goes for 4 miles. Then she slows down and walks at a constant rate, it says. The first hour, she is 6.5 meters from her house. So be careful with that. Remember, at this point, she was 4. Then she stops and starts walking. And then at this point, in total, she's 6.5. So that means all the way here is 6.5, which means this part is just 2.5. That's 1 hour. So she's going 2.5 miles per hour. That's her walking pace. Then it says, what if she keeps going and walks for 2 more hours? Well, that's another 2.5 and another 2.5. So in total, if we added all these up, what's the total distance she is from her house? That would be 11.5. So the key here was to realize that this is the 6.5 is not that she walked for 6.5. It's, remember, she already jogged the 4. And then to get to 6.5, she needed to walk 2.5. And then she keeps that pace going for 2 more hours. So this one was a little bit of a tricky one, I think, for many of you to think through. So what it says here is that in the smaller prism, so there's a little tiny prism here that gets cut out. And it says that the lengths here are 1/2 what the larger one would have been. So if the larger one, right, if we have base times height times depth, base, height, and depth, then our smaller one is a half of the depth and a half of the base and a half of the height. Volume is base times height times depth. In this case, it's 240. So the volume of the smaller one then will be 1/2 times the base times 1/2 times the height times 1/2 times depth. When I do that, 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/8 of the base times height times depth. Well, what was the base, the height, and the depth? The base, the height, and the depth was 240. So this smaller one then must be 1/8 of 240, which is really like saying 240 divided by 8. That's the same thing. When we do that, we get 30, which means this smaller piece here that we cut out, we took away a volume of 30. So if the original was 240 and we took away 30, we are left with 210 for our answer. This might have been a little bit more challenging for grade 5 students who haven't really done much with volume and haven't really done much with fractions. Hopefully the grade 6 students were able to kind of start to figure out some of this or have an idea of what some of this might be. So this here might be a bit tricky because probability may or may not be a new concept to some of you. So the probability is sort of the formula that we say is we say a favorable outcome, and sorry for the writing and my pen isn't working, over all the possible outcomes. So for example, if we flipped a coin, our possible outcomes are heads or tails. If I wanted heads, if I win if I choose heads, then my favorable outcome is 1 because I only win if I get heads, and my possible outcomes are 2. So my probability of winning the game would be 1/2. If I, let's say I had 4 quarters, they were labeled A, B, C, and D, and I only win if quarter A comes up, that means my favorable outcome is 1 out of my possible outcomes, which is 4. So that's how probability works. So in this case here, what we had to realize is that we have an 8-sided dice, which is a little bit different. Normally we have 6. And it's being rolled twice. So on the first roll, we could get any number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And on the second roll, we could get any number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Figure out how many possible outcomes there are, because remember, that's the bottom of our, remember it was favorable divided by possible outcomes. There are 8 times 8, or 64 possible things that can happen when I roll 2 dice together. If you want to kind of think about that, you can almost make like a little chart, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but for example, if I rolled a 1 and a 1, I would get a sum of 2. A 1 and a 2, I'd get a sum of 3. A 1 and a 3, a sum of 4. So you're going to see, if I were to keep going with this and make a chart that had all my possible 8 dice here and all my possible 8 numbers here, if I were to make this out almost like a multiplication table, except I'm adding these together, I would end up with 64 possibilities. Some of the possibilities repeat, like for example, right, I get 4. They'll repeat, but in total I have 64 possibilities. So that would be the bottom part. So now the question is, what are my favorable outcomes? So it says that what my favorable outcome is that I want the product to be divisible by 9. Okay, so I want, when I multiply the 2 dice together, so I guess I should have multiplied down here, sorry, I added. When I multiply the 2 dice together, I want something where the product is divisible by 9. So let's start to think about all of those possibilities. Well, what if I had 3 and 3? Is that product divisible by 9? Yes. What if I had 3 and 6? Is that product divisible by 9? Yes. So really what you need to think about here is what are all the possible products that I could come up with? Like 8 times 8 will be 64, 7 times 7 will be 49. What are all the possible products, and how many of them will give me will be divisible by 9? Now, 3 and 6 is 1, but so is 6 and 3. Remember, those are different because this would be 3 on the first dice and 6 on the second dice. This would be 6 on the first dice and 3 on the second. I still get 18 there. The last one to think about is 6 times 6, or 36. If I were to go through my table and multiply all of these, so again, I apologize because I added them, these are the only ones right here. These are the only ones that give me products that are divisible by 9. There are 4 in total, which means now my favorable outcomes is 4. So to get the probability, it is 4 over 64, which simplifies to 1 over 60. If you have any questions, please come and see me, and I'm happy to chat about it.